Joining me now is David Hunter, Professor of Health Policy and Management at Durham University. Hello, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, I'd like to talk to you about NHS funding, but first of all, let's talk about how the National Health System works. For today's Focus report, we met a Welshman who goes to England for medical treatment. Does England have the fairest system in the UK?
I don't think it's possible to judge that in that way. I think all parts of the NHS have strengths and weaknesses, and I think that applies as much to England as to Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland.
OK, so how much of an issue is the NHS in this election?
I think it's an issue in the sense that the NHS remains one of the institutions that people feel very loyal to and very committed to and want to see succeed. So in that sense, it's a very important part of people's lives. And I think in each election, we've seen the NHS as one of the big items on the agenda that people want to see discussed and properly funded and well run.
Are you reassured by the promises that the main parties have made? I mean, just how concerned are you about the future of the NHS?
I think there is an issue over funding, and as your report just mentioned, the 8 billion that's been talked about in relation to what's needed between now and 2020 per year is probably insufficient to fund a lot of new developments. It's more a case of allowing the NHS to stand still. So politicians haven't really come clean in terms of the longer term in regard to whether taxes need to be raised, more money needs to be found to put into healthcare. But it's not just the NHS. I mean, the NHS is dependent on other services as well. And social care, care in people's homes, care in the community is vitally important to ensure that the people who end up in hospital are the people who need to be there, not people who are there because they can't get proper out-of-hospital care. And I think a big issue for the parties is to ensure that social care, which is funded differently through local government, is actually properly invested in. And that's a big problem. I think the cuts have fallen heavily on social care, and that's put pressure on the health service.
Now, the UK has one of the lowest rates of practicing doctors per capita in Europe. Labour, though, saying it'll provide more doctors, 8,000. Is that going to be enough if they get into power and are able to keep that promise?
Well, indeed, if they keep that promise and get into power. Well, I think every qualified medical doctor and nurse is a bonus. You can probably never have too many of people like that. The issue, I think, is how they are managed and what they're there to do, and whether that is the best type of investment. I think in many cases, one might argue that the money might be better put into prevention, into keeping people out of the NHS, rather than constantly putting money into the health system and repairing people when they fall ill. We don't do enough, I think, in terms of public health and keeping people out of hospital.
So do you think prevention should be one of the priorities of the future, the new government, whatever it's made up of?
Yes, definitely. And one of the problems, I think, in this campaign has been the lack of mention of public health, of prevention. It's all been about beds, hospitals, more doctors, more nurses, all the usual things which never really solve the problem ultimately if the population itself is getting more unhealthy. And there's a report out today from WHO talking about obesity levels in Europe that are rising exponentially over the next few years, between now and 2030. If we don't get a grip on some of these public health issues, no healthcare system is going to be possible to maintain in terms of universal access to care.
And then, of course, there's the issue of an ageing population.
Indeed. And while many people are aging more healthily, inevitably with longer life comes more frailty and people being more dependent. But again, some of that dependence will be on the social care system, not the health system. And people end up in hospital beds because they can't get good social care. And that affects the elderly as well. Most hospital beds now are occupied by elderly people, not all of whom need to be there.
Now, a damning report by the Economist Intelligence Unit says that it's not just staffing that's a worry. And like you said, that's not the only issue. There's prevention as well. But apparently there's a lack of equipment. You mentioned earlier how perhaps more money should be invested in new technologies. Is that what you meant? Looking forward rather than just injecting enough money for the system to stay as it is?
Yes, I think new technology, new digital technology can help people again maintain more independent lives, speed up the way hospital records are kept and accessed and so on. I think technology has rather been underinvested in the health service, so there is more that could be done to speed up communication flows and make sure that people don't fall foul of a system that currently is too paper-based still.
OK, that's all we've got time for. David Hunter, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Professor.